outside City Hall. They plan to protest what they call Mayor Julia.
This is On the Line. I'm Brian Lehrer, and a reminder that later in the hour, the new controversies about men's and women's brains. Is science discovering that men and women really do think differently? And what does that mean for equality in the workplace, the economy, and the home? But our first stop this hour is Penn Station. If you use Penn Station even occasionally, you know there's been a lot of renovation in the last few years in both the Long Island Railroad and the Amtrak and New Jersey Transit sections. But if station planners get their way, it's only the beginning. Designs have been drawn to make Penn Station nothing less than the hub of all train traffic in a vast new Northeast corridor and Northeast job market, and maybe even humanize the place in the process. But can the new Penn Station be an improvement over the current new Penn Station? That is, can the new Penn Station be an improvement over the current new Penn Station? And will shrinking government mean the ultimate vision will never be realized? Joining me now is Tony Hiss, staff writer for the New York Observer. He's written for the New Yorker for decades and a visiting fellow at New York University's Urban Research Center. He's writing a book on transportation. You may know his 1990 book, The Experience of Place. And he has a long article on Penn Station in the March 6th issue of the New York Observer. Tony, thanks so much for being with us. Good morning.
Delighted to be here.
Start off with this vision of Penn Station, if you would, as a Northeast hub, and something you write that could even change the whole East Coast job market. That's quite a statement.
It is quite a statement, but many people who have heard about the possibility of a new Penn Station, a $315 million project, don't realize that this would, if it happens, be the capstone of something like $6 billion worth of public investment, all of which is committed, which is sort of repositioning, recentering Penn Station as the most important train station in a 450-mile-long corridor between Washington and Boston. What's happening now is that, in addition, as you mentioned, the Long Island Railroad spent a couple $100 million doing a very good job of upgrading.
I'll tell you, as somebody who uses the LIRR from time to time, it is much more comfortable than it used to be.
Beautiful job. It's air-conditioned for the first time. It has some spaciousness, some elegance. Ironically, the elegance is actually borrowed from Grand Central Station. The kind of marble they installed was not what we thought of as the original Penn Station, but even has a beautiful art piece by Maya Lin, her new clock.
It's intriguing. I've heard many people standing around actually debating whether it's a beautiful new art piece, but it certainly gets the juices flowing.
She ran into trouble. There was a bad engine fire in Penn Station just before it was installed. The station was filled with smoke for hours and hours, and it's all based on hundreds of miles of fiber optic cable, which all got coated with the grease from this fire, and it's in the budget to clean it off. But beyond that, there is now in the works, Amtrak has the money to do a project that the New Haven Railroad started to do in the 1920s, which is to electrify the train tracks between New Haven and Boston. They're already electrified between Washington, D.C. and New Haven. This will allow them, with some modern high-speed rail equipment, for the first time to offer, say, 2-hour and 45-minute trains between New York and Boston, and get the running times on the metro liners between New York and Washington down to 2 hours and 15 minutes. So you then have a real high-speed corridor, almost European terms, high-speed rail corridor.
And why does that have so much of an impact, theoretically, on the economy? I mean, you can already take the metro rail to Washington in under 3 hours.
And it does, in fact, dominate the business travel market already between Washington and New York.
More than the air shuttles?
Oh, Amtrak carries more than either of the two air shuttles. And I think if they get the running time down to 2:15, they could probably carry more people than both of them put together. And the same would hold true from New York to Boston. But it isn't just that they're getting people out of planes or even off the cars, out of their cars, but for the first time it now means that you could have commute times of an hour and a half between, say, Providence and to the north of us and Wilmington to the south of us, so that it would make sense to be, New York could be the focal point, as I said, for the first time since the Erie Canal repositioned New York in the early 19th century, you have a chance for New York to become the focal point for things running through. At the same time that this commuter service is being upgraded, New Jersey Transit is about to pour far more trains into Penn Station through several connections they're making. Trains that now have to go to Hoboken will start to go into Penn Station. And that, for the first time, means that you could begin to have real regional through trains the way the Parisians have spent billions of dollars setting up a new high-speed regional rail system.
Are you suggesting that some people might live in a nice suburban split level in Delaware and commute to Midtown Manhattan?
It's not beyond the realm of conceivability. And what makes it more exciting is that all this money is already committed. $6 billion worth, which is an enormous public investment in this day and age.
Well, actually, the big vocabulary word in Washington these days is rescission. Money that's already been earmarked for public broadcasting might be taken away under what's known as rescission, and I understand the same thing may happen to at least $40 million of the federal funds for this Penn Station project. But I want to ask you about that in a minute.
Okay.
What kind of new jobs do you think would be created as a result? Because I don't still quite get it, and I think a lot of the listeners probably don't. What kinds of new industries, what kinds of new jobs would likely be created as a result of being able to get from here to Delaware or here to New Haven or Boston so quickly?
Well, New York actually has several clusters of job markets that are doing much better than people thought in not just financial services, but it's still the media capital, and it looks at, and by the way, I think I don't want to see any rescission for public broadcasting any more than I do for Penn Station.
We'll mark you down for our next fundraiser.
Absolutely. But there are, in fact, very exciting things, because it looks as though no matter how the world changes and the way work changes, there'll still need to be, maybe on each continent, one really dense major center, and New York is in a position now to be that capital for the Western Hemisphere, which would mean that things could flow back through here thanks to it's ironic, but we're talking about rebuilding a early 20th century, late 19th century railroad network to make New York work in the 21st century.
It is ironic, and it makes me wonder. Oh, and by the way, let me put out our phone number. Tony Hiss is my guest, and we're talking about Penn Station, and our phone number 212-267-WNYC, 267-9692. Is this worth it to the taxpayers? Maybe this kind of vast urban planning project is becoming a thing of a bygone era. Maybe there's something to the critique that private dollars will get the economy going where it needs to go, even maybe including transportation system built where there's a demand that springs up in the economy.
Well, it looks like, I think, whether you like trains or not, I do like trains, but I think we're stuck with them.
My 2-year-old adores trains, but that's another story.
And my 3.5-year-old. Got to get them together. One sort of back of the envelope calculation that was made recently was that if Penn Station ceased to exist, we would need something like 35,000 more cars would come into New York, Manhattan every day, which would require 50 full-block high-rise garages for parking. We'd need 65 new lanes of traffic within Manhattan to handle those cars. We'd need a new 8-lane superhighway to New Jersey and a new 32-lane superhighway to Long Island.
But nobody's talking about Penn Station ceasing to exist. It's just a question of whether this expansion of a grand
But
edifice
that's
is
just
fully
talking
realized.
about the cars coming in today, and we're talking about much larger volumes coming in both from New Jersey and this high-speed Northeast Corridor traffic. People have to have a place to go, and the current station is simply not adequate. That's why it seems to me that if you look at the $315 million, which by itself is a large amount of money, which obviously could go to many useful purposes, if you don't think of it as just that, but as the final 5% of this $6 billion investment that's already in the works, it makes a great deal of sense. And by the way, I think in terms of private dollars leveraging public investments, one of the things that's most realistic and intelligent about this Amtrak idea for a new Penn Station is that $70 million of this would be covered by bonds they would float, in which they would be backed up by the increased retail revenue they expect to get by putting new shopping into the post office, where they would relocate across from the existing Penn Station and in the old Penn Station itself.
So talk about that vision, because that's going to be interesting to a lot of people, that Penn Station and the current General Post Office, 8th Avenue and 34th Street, would what? Be merged into one huge unit where the post office would be part of the train station, but it would still be a post office?
Basically, yes. Originally, the post office planned to vacate entirely. Then they decided, well, this is our premier retail location in the city. 7,000 people come in, or sales are extremely high at those windows, and it's the only post office open 24
hours, 365 days a year.
That's right.
366 during leap years.
And many people know it at midnight on tax night.
Well, midnight on tax night, I think you can go to any local branch and there's somebody out there smiling and taking your package and waiting for a TV crew to roll by.
But the real party is at 33rd and 8th.
Yes. But the real when there is real need, other than people who knew there was an April 15th deadline and couldn't get it done until 11:30. On a day-by-day basis, it's good to know that window is there.
It's
Presumably
part of
it would stay open somewhere.
That's right, and it's part of being a 24-hour city. It seems to me logical to have it across from a 24-hour railroad station. It's also a noble building in its own right. It was built by the same architects who built the original Penn Station, and behind the public facade and the public retail operation is this vast atrium, which was built for the mail sorters and which they will be moving out of, and which would be available. And because of the way Penn Station's built, the tracks are right under this atrium, so it seems perfectly logical to start digging staircases and escalators down from that room to the tracks. Some objections have been that people would have to walk further. There'd be more of a schlep if you're coming from East Midtown, but in fact it's only about 100 feet or 200 the most farther west, because
the tracks, you mean.
The Amtrak trains you board from just east of 8th Avenue now, and you now board them from just west of 8th Avenue.
I want to take a phone call right now, and then I want to talk more about the architecture of it. Tony Hiss is my guest, staff writer for the New York Observer and a visiting fellow.
And for the New Yorker magazine.
And still for the New Yorker magazine. You got 3 full-time jobs? Staff writer for the New Yorker?
Well, I'm trying to write a couple of books, actually.
And a visiting fellow at NYU's Urban Research Center, and you're writing a couple of books.
That's right.
Do you sleep?
Well, we have a 3.5-year-old, so of course we don't.
Yes, well, if they move Thomas the Tank Engine into Penn Station, then my 2-year-old
then we're talking.
Want to go. Stephen in Manhattan, you're on the line.
Yeah, well, I just have the standard question as to who the people to contact are if you're interested in this issue and you want to encourage people in Congress. And then I read Mr. Hiss's article, and I think he mentioned in it that the post office building is 1/6 the size of the original Penn Station, but my understanding is that they're on sites of similar size, so I just wondered what he had to say about that.
I'm glad you brought that up. That is a slightly confusing point. The part of the post office that would be used as a train station is about 1/6 of the size of the existing Penn Station.
Meaning the atrium?
Yes, meaning going from 8th Avenue west through the atrium and then stopping. And that's part of the original part of the post office. There is now behind it an enormous annex, so that it does fill the entire block, as you say, between...
Right, as when it was first constructed, it was half the present site, and then they later extended it.
That's right, and that
what happened to the rest of
that annex will still be a post office facility.
I
It would have nothing to do with Amtrak moving in.
And what about the first question?
Well, Senator Moynihan is the champion of this project, and still thinks that it is alive and kicking. He's been joined bipartisanly by Senator D'Amato, who is also strongly behind it, and Representative Molinari from Staten Island, Susan Molinari, is also supportive of it. These are sort of the 3 key congressional people.
Those are the local people, but are there any chairmen that are from other areas that might be more? I mean, presumably our local representatives would be for this, but who could one sort of write a letter to try to encourage them?
I believe Congressman Bud Schuster from Pennsylvania is the new Transportation Committee chairman, and he would be a logical person. And he's been, for a new Republican committee chairman, quite friendly towards Amtrak.
All right, Stephen, thank you very much. And in fact, the other article, the companion piece to yours, was about the politics of it, but it seemed much less optimistic than what you just expressed. It said even the combined forces, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but even the combined forces of D'Amato and Moynihan may not